Hi, I'm Ted Myers with the Cognitive Portfolio. Today I have with me Dan Hassan, content specialist with FeedbackFruits. Dan, it's great to have you with us today.
Great to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Of course. So Dan, I understand, in all of your experience, you've interviewed dozens of teachers, gotten to sit on classrooms, gotten to really see firsthand how the different tools of FeedbackFruits are being used. Could you walk us through a use case and the impact of the technology on a specific learning instance?
That's a very tough question because I have now over 30 use cases in the past year to choose from. So whittling it down, I'm going to exclude and upset someone. But maybe I'll start a little bit more general, if that's okay. Just building on something that was mentioned with Ewald. We focus sometimes on scaling pedagogical approaches with class size, with different institutions. And that really just made me think the approaches that we use in face-to-face lessons, in small personal teaching situations, how do you scale that to a hybrid class with over 500 students, for example? For a specific use case, I could point to, let's see, Deakin University, a course in marine biology with Alicia Belgrove. And they used peer review and group member evaluation. These are two of our tools to keep an eye on group dynamics and be able to generate peer feedback even outside of the classroom. So nothing new. A lot of courses, of course, are in some way integrating peer feedback or teacher to peer feedback. All right, so this was a course in which students had to create group presentations, right? Nothing new there. And one of the most interesting things that I've heard over these use case interviews is that there is actually a benefit to doing some things online. Even though we were, of course, all forced into hybrid situations with COVID or fully online, there have been some takeaways which has shown that some things are better when you can prepare for them asynchronously. So specifically, if we think about these group presentations in this marine botany class, these groups and the student cohort was, I think, not so huge, about 65 students split up into groups of 3 or 4. They would work over the whole semester on this poster presentation and then present it at the end to all their peers at the end of the course. Now, I don't know if you've had group presentations before at the end of your courses and had to stand in front of the class with your PowerPoint, right? And then at the end you ask, are there any questions? And it's like Zoom. There's sometimes a deafening silence, right? You'll have 1 or 2. But in this use case, that opportunity to ask questions was posed a week before the presentation. So the groups would already prepare their presentation, upload it using our tools, put it on the platform, and the teacher mandated that every group, every individual watched other groups' presentations and generated that question beforehand. So when it came to the actual presentation a week later, everyone had a question. And the instructor was shocked. This doesn't usually happen, right? When we're put on the spot, just like me getting started with this interview, when we're put on the spot with a question, it's sometimes hard to generate an answer. It's sometimes hard to think, even if you've got a ton to say or ask, which I do, definitely. Structuring those thoughts, prioritizing, framing them, that can be difficult. So for me, the crux of this use case was giving students enough time to prepare by letting them see the content beforehand in the platform, pose that question, and then give them a week to digest that and even address it inside their presentation if they want to. That was the takeaway for me. And the other thing about this, equally important, is that group dynamics can be very hard to keep an eye on, whether that's in person or probably especially if you're hundreds, thousands of miles away from your students. You've never seen them face to face, let alone how they interact with each other. How then do you have any earthly idea what's going on in the group? Well, of course, there are some tools, there are some ways you can keep track on pieces of paper how things are going. But again, back to scaling that, having this opportunity for groups to give feedback to each other with this tool we have called group member evaluation, right? Having this feedback opportunity scaffolded, structured, announced by the teacher really lets students know, okay, I'm working in a group project. Some students hate group projects. I just did a podcast, I'll talk about it a little bit later, about group work. And you've got these problems that keep coming up, right? Free riding, unequal distribution of tasks and labor, unclear roles. And I'm certainly not saying FeedbackFruits is a miracle cure for every problem, but I will say that when it comes to having transparency about group dynamics, these tools, these interfaces are really the way to go to generate that data, to have it in one clear oversight.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, talked about a lot of things there, but generally it's about transparency and about preparation and giving students the time to be able to do those things.
Yeah, I love that use case because I mean, I definitely can relate to giving student presentations and having that deafening silence. And I think that really mimics a lot of what I've seen since I've started my career in terms of the way information is presented. You know, it's never usually just standing up in front of the room and showing people something for the first time. That's not really how people process information. You know, you kind of need to click through the presentation on your own time, digest it, and then you get to experience it live with the energy and the live presentation from the people who have been doing the research and doing the work. And then I think that that's where really your own learning comes with the energy and the passion of the person who's kind of done the work. And then that's really where you can have that beautiful collaboration that you mentioned in the classroom. So
exactly.
that's really cool to hear. You know, what I'm curious about is how do you measure the impact of this? You know, like it's such a qualitative thing that we're trying to do, or you're trying to do here. So how is FeedbackFruits measuring the impact that the tool's making and the impact, you know, that student interaction is having on the learning experience?
I can tell you about net performance scores, customer satisfaction surveys, but really I haven't been too involved in the quantitative side of it. And that's been quite a recent approach, a recent campaign that we're starting to do to try to generate this quantitative data. My job has been purely qualitative. How has it gone? What have you done exactly? What have you been up to with this course?
Sure. So on the qualitative side, you know, in this use case or in others, what are students and teachers saying? What is, you know, the qualitative feedback?
Again, there's so many things to touch upon that I'm going to have to think about where to start. Maybe I should have done a week before preparation, like I talked about with the use case. I would say that people don't always know what they're looking for, firstly. So when it comes to starting to use these tools for the first time, there's a lot of trial and error. There is a learning curve. It's not instantly intuitive to a lot of people unless they're tech wizards, what they're wanting to get out of it. So to answer your question negatively, first of all, it isn't an instant success, an instant turnaround when you start applying these pedagogical tools. But put the time in, allow yourself to fail, allow yourself to make mistakes and to make errors, and be honest about them, and you will see the benefits. What are those benefits? Well, I think the biggest thing is that it saves time. Back to scaling again, when you have 5, 10, 50 students in a class, you may be able to, as a teacher, give individual feedback to everyone. How is that going to work when you have 500 students, 500 theses? It's very difficult to do that personally. So having these peer feedback moments and excuse my salesy language, but a streamlined, intuitive interface where that feedback can be where it can happen, where it can be organized, where peers can be assigned to each other. That's already making that sometimes a little bit arbitrary process more straightforward. So we can say that it saves time. It makes it easier to process these kind of activities. But from a teacher's perspective, something that comes up time and time again is that it's useful to see the data, how groups are performing with each other, how individual students are performing on a task, whether that's handing in a written assignment or a video assignment even, how are they performing on that? So a teacher can judge that by looking at peer ratings on that assignment, or it can be a reading activity with our interactive study materials at FeedbackFruits. And in this sense, a teacher will upload a document to be read. They can block off sections, they can add inline questions, and when a student goes through it, they're not just presented with a 20-page article that they have to read, they're guided through it. And asynchronously, this is so important that, I'm still a student right now, I'm still attending classes, but I haven't seen any of my peers. I've never met the teacher. We had a few lectures on Zoom, and that's the only connection I have to my institution, to the literature. That's the only guidance I have. So when I have now a way of not just seeing the material and seeing what I'm supposed to do, but having the option to collaborate, to ask questions in that document, to answer questions from the teacher or from my peers, that's making it less of a me trying to do something by myself and more of a us trying to achieve something together situation. So I can talk in broad strokes about the benefits, the collaboration, the teamwork, the oversight of students, analytics, these collaboration things. But I feel I'll be a broken record, honestly.
No, I think this is super interesting, and more from the student perspective. I mean, I can just imagine it's so great to get feedback from more than one source, right? Because it's so, especially in a more opinion or more kind of open-ended subjects, like it's really just, there's a ton of bias in one person's response to your work. And so being able to kind of just feel different responses from a wider range of people, I think would be huge. Especially
but it's not always, sorry to interrupt, it's not always easy to give feedback to each other. And another thing that I've seen from these interviews is that it needs structuring, it needs scaffolding. And we see that particularly at lower levels, at first year bachelors, for instance, students don't feel like subject area experts. They don't feel like I know the answers and so I can evaluate or judge my peers. We see at those kinds of levels that teacher feedback is much more important, that group feedback or peer feedback needs to really carefully be structured. So an effective strategy that I would recommend for teachers of students at these kind of lower age groups, younger demographics, is really be so transparent about what you want the feedback to achieve and why it's powerful in the first place. We can mention that, different perspectives are, we like to get feedback. We want to know how we're growing, and we can't see all that from our own two eyeballs. And there's also cultural difference, isn't it? That some people here in the Dutch culture, where I'm living right now, people are direct. That's the stereotype anyway. People will say what they think. It's quite easy to learn about if you did something right or wrong. The example I like to use is a rare evening when I was having a little dance in a club back before Corona times, really going for it. And a woman sitting at the bar said to me, "Excuse me, you're very smelly. Do you have any deodorant?" And I was absolutely shocked. I didn't know what to say, what to respond, but I let it pass. And I said, "I'm sorry about that. Do you have any deodorant?" And she didn't, but her friend did. And so I put some on, and then it was all back. And she said, "Sorry, but I always say something." And even though it was initially a little bit jarring, I'm glad she did. I don't want anyone to be, having a bad smell sensory experience when they're trying to enjoy themselves. That is not something that I would ever have expected from anyone in any setting to say something like that, unless they were looking for a fight, right? But then you have some cultures which you have more of a face, more of a stiff upper lip or reserved kind of attitude. So how do you, as a teacher, and this is an open question, how do you as a teacher find the balance between those different approaches, especially if you've got a very ethnically diverse student population, right? I'm afraid I've kind of got off topic from your question a little bit. Could you remind me?
No, this is all very interesting. To be honest, don't quite remember what the original question was. I'm just here enamored. No, I mean, definitely that's something I've experienced in the US, so learning alongside a wide range of cultures. And definitely, it's great to have that friend who will let you know you have some lettuce in your teeth, because it's always better to know than to not know. So I think that also kind of plays into the theme of feedback fruits, and just trying to provide that candid and constructive feedback that we all really require on to grow and develop as humans. So, I mean, I think it all ties back together.
Yeah, and you see some very effective reusable rubrics and approaches. Like I was talking with my friend who mentioned this from the business world, actually, the hamburger model. You have two nice things that you're going to say, and they sandwich the meat of the criticism that you're about to impart on someone. So I'll say, Ted, I really love your shirt, but your headset, what's up with that? But on the other hand, your hair's looking great today. So nice
compliment
thing.
Sandwich, of course.
Exactly, a compliment
the feedback sandwich. Yeah. No.
As I mentioned, this came from my friend in the business world. This isn't something I've seen in education really happening. But I think it's a nice way for kind of mature audiences to generate that feedback for each other. Another rubric I love is tip and top, which the Dutch say, like a tip for someone, something they can improve on, and a top, something they did very well. Or keep, start, stop. What should you keep doing, start doing, etc. So when you put these rubrics in place and explain what the point is, like what we're trying to do, we're trying to improve each other. And also fundamental, the first thing with me for learning, and I love learning is about making mistakes, right? So I think Ewout said that when we look at the state of education, no one's at fault. I absolutely disagree. I think everyone is at fault. My fault, your fault, systems. But that's not a bad thing. It's not about blame. It's not pointing the finger at someone, but it's saying, what are those faults? How can we talk about them? How can we get to grips with our relationships with those faults, our responsibilities, and take responsibility and be prepared to fail, be prepared to make mistakes, and be open and transparent about them. And then you can build on them. Then you can move forward.
Absolutely agree. Well, as we come to close here, is there anything else that you'd like to mention about feedback fruits or otherwise while you have the platform?
Glad you asked. And I know that you know that I want to do a little plug for our podcast over at Feedback Fruits, which we just started. That's the Learning Experience Lab. You can find it on SoundCloud and Spotify. And like you, Ted, I'm starting out this year with this project. So I hope that we can keep in close contact and really support each other's growth.
Absolutely. Starting a podcast is a lot of fun. I've learned a lot doing it. And what better way to spread your message in 2021 than through the digital channels? It's really just the best way to expand your reach. So I think that's a great project alongside everything that you folks are doing over at Feedback Fruits. Really loved having both of you on and loved hearing the two perspectives on everything that the company's up to. It's a really great mission.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.